And we have to kick things off with a true heavyweight champion of fears, ophidiophobia, the fear of snakes. Now, we're not just talking about a mild dislike or thinking they're kind of creepy. No, this is an intense, often overwhelming sense of dread at just the thought of a snake. So, why snakes? What's the big deal?
Well, the sheer scale of this fear is what's so wild. About a third of all adult humans have this fear to some degree, and the reason is pure, simple evolution. For millions of years, our ancestors who are instinctively super cautious around these potential danger noodles were just more likely to survive, have kids, and pass on their genes. So in a way, this fear isn't a bug in our system, it's a feature.
And this really gets to the heart of why snakes are so unnerving. It's that unnatural, slithering, legless movement. It's the cold, unblinking stare that our brains just can't get a read on. And of course, it's that ancient, baked-in knowledge that some of them have a single fatal bite. Even today, sitting safe in a concrete jungle, just seeing a snake on a TV screen can cause the brain to totally short-circuit, tapping right into that ancient alarm system.
All right, let's climb our way up to the next primal fear, acrophobia, the fear of heights. And this is way more than just a little vertigo. It can be anything from a simple, totally rational unease when you're on a ladder, all the way to a full-blown panic attack just from looking up at a skyscraper from the safety of the sidewalk.
And this is where we see that huge difference between a healthy instinct and a true phobia. See, healthy caution is that little voice inside that says, hey, maybe don't lean quite so far over that railing. But acrophobia, which affects about 5% of the population, it takes that voice and multiplies it by 1,000. Your brain doesn't just warn you. It produces a vivid, slow-motion disaster movie where you're the star.
And here's where it gets truly bizarre.
And kind of cruel. Some people with acrophobia experience what's called the high place phenomenon. It's this sudden, intrusive, absolutely terrifying thought about jumping, even though the person has zero desire to do so. Researchers think it might be the brain's alarm system getting its wires crossed. Your brain knows you're safe, but the fear signal is so loud it gets scrambled, creating this horrifying internal feedback loop. Okay, so not all fears are hardwired into our DNA from birth. Some are learned. And that brings us to our next category, situational fears. These are the phobias that are often forged in the fire of experience, sometimes from one single traumatic moment that completely and permanently rewires how our brain sees a specific threat.
And as we go through these, you might find some of them hitting a little close to home. Do these feel familiar at all? That's the thing about phobias. They often start from a place of very understandable fear. The line between just a bad memory and a life-altering phobia is actually incredibly thin.
Let's take cynophobia, the fear of dogs. For a lot of people, this comes from one single terrifying event, like being bitten or even just aggressively chased when they were a kid. That one bad encounter is so powerful, it can basically force the brain to recategorize man's best friend as man's worst nightmare in its mental filing cabinet, overwriting everything else. And here's what makes this particular phobia so tough to live with. While it affects 5 to 7% of people, the real problem is that dogs are, well, they're absolutely everywhere. You see them in parks, on sidewalks, in cafes, at your friends' houses. So avoiding the trigger just isn't a realistic option, which can turn something as simple as a walk around the block into this high-stakes, anxiety-fueled mission. Next up, aquaphobia, the fear of water, which hits about 2 to 3% of people. It could be a fear of deep water, or in really extreme cases, any water at all. And just like cynophobia, it often kicks off with one scary moment. Maybe you went under for a few seconds too long as a kid, or maybe someone jokingly pushed you into the deep end. Yeah, thanks for that lifelong trauma, Uncle Jerry. This can be an incredibly isolating phobia. I mean, think about it. So much of our social life, especially in the summer, revolves around water. It can mean you're constantly having to turn down invitations to the beach, or lake trips, or pool parties, often from friends who mean well but just don't get it. They say things like, oh, just get in, you'll be fine. And that lack of understanding can be almost as stressful as the fear itself. Okay, next we've got claustrophobia, the fear of confined spaces. And this one affects a pretty significant chunk of the population, about 5 to 10%. Like other situational fears, it can be triggered by something specific, like getting stuck in an elevator. But sometimes it just develops for no clear reason at all. The brain just decides, nope, small spaces are the enemy, and suddenly the walls start closing in. And here's the really cruel irony. Our modern world often feels like it was perfectly designed to trigger this phobia.
We've got elevators, jam-packed subways, MRI machines, and, of course, those ever-shrinking airplane seats. We've basically built a world based on efficiency instead of personal space. And for someone with claustrophobia, just getting through the day can be an exhausting battle. And that brings us perfectly to our last category, modern anxieties. This is what happens when our ancient survival-focused brains that were designed for the dangers of the savannah, have to suddenly process the really unique complexities of the 21st century, from high-speed global travel to high-tech invasive medicine. At the heart of this is a really fascinating paradox, and it's perfectly captured by aerophobia, the fear of flying. Somewhere between 10 and 40% of people feel this in some way. Logically, your rational brain knows it's one of the safest ways to travel on the planet. But just try telling that to your primal brain when you're sealed in a metal tube, 7 miles above the ground, with a complete and total loss of control. Logic rarely wins that fight. And this leads us right into the world of modern medicine and two very closely related phobias. Hemophobia, the fear of blood, and trypanophobia, the fear of needles. And just look at that number for needles. It affects up to a staggering 25% of adults. That means for 1 in 4 adults, a routine shot isn't routine at all. It's a major, terrifying ordeal. And this is where we see a really unique physical reaction that sets these phobias apart from most others. See, instead of triggering a fight or flight response that ramps you up, these can cause something called a vasovagal response. Basically, the sight of blood or a needle overstimulates a big nerve that helps regulate your heart. Your heart rate and blood pressure suddenly plummet, and your body just hits the emergency shutdown button. You faint. It's the body's strange way of playing dead. And the real-world consequences here are incredibly serious. This is not a minor inconvenience. People with an intense fear of needles will actively avoid essential medical care. They'll skip vaccinations, put off critical blood tests, and even refuse dental work or pain medication, all because the fear of the cure feels so much worse than the illness itself. So, when you boil it all down, what is a phobia? Well, it's essentially a bug in our survival software. It's the brain's safety system, an incredibly powerful and well-intentioned system that's been cranked up way too high. And in a lot of cases, it's now aimed at the completely wrong target. It's a system designed to protect us that has somehow become a prison.
But that leaves us with one last fascinating and I think ultimately hopeful thought. The very existence of phobias is proof of just how powerfully our brains can learn, adapt, and create connections. So, if our minds are capable of learning such intense, specific, and powerful fear, just imagine what else they're capable of learning to overcome it.